Welcome, listeners. I'm Silas, your sleepy storyteller, pulling you down the rabbit hole of time, where dreams and memories intertwine. If you enjoy these videos, please tap the like button. It really helps. Also, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can keep drifting along on your sleepy journey through history. And before we wander down the rabbit hole, share your city and time in the comments. I love imagining our journey threading through every ticking clock. Now, take a moment to find a comfortable resting position. Close your eyes gently, and in your own time, allow yourself to sink into the quiet atmosphere of the past as we begin our slow journey together. The night air is sharp with coal smoke and champagne, a strange mix of soot and celebration. I stand before Checkpoint Charlie, the gate that once divided the city with suspicion and barbed wire. The guardhouse still stands, its white booth lit by a single bulb that flickers like an eye grown weary. For decades, this place was shadow and silence, where glances could condemn and a wrong step could cost a life. Tonight, it is chaos. Not the chaos of fear, but of joy untamed, messy, uncoordinated, unstoppable. The cobblestones are slick with frost, reflecting the yellow haze of gas lamps strung along the border. I watch as an East German Trabant sputters through the checkpoint, its tiny two-stroke engine coughing smoke that hangs low in the air. Its driver, a man in a threadbare coat and fur cap, grips the wheel with white-knuckled intensity, though his eyes shine with something brighter than nerves, disbelief. Behind him, passengers spill out, children with scarves trailing, a grandmother in a heavy kerchief, a young woman with eyes red from crying. They do not hurry, they do not slink. They run forward into arms waiting on the west side. Brothers crash against brothers. Mothers clasp daughters. Friends embrace so fiercely it seems they would fuse together if they could. Laughter cuts the night, raw and uneven, broken by sobs. Everywhere, champagne corks explode like small fireworks, fizzing arcs spraying into the cold. Vendors stand at the periphery with crates of cheap bottles, handing them out as if they were relics of liberation. Strangers share swigs, tilting glass to glass, their breaths rising in frosted clouds that dissolve into one another. A man climbs atop the booth itself, draping a banner across its front. Freiheit, freedom. The crowd roars, and the word seems to ripple outward into the very air. I step forward, weaving through the throng. Horse-drawn carriages, rare but still clattering across Berlin's winter streets, wait at the edges, their drivers wide-eyed at the spectacle. Sleek Mercedes sedans from the west idle beside coughing Trabants from the east, their lights haloed by the fog. It is a traffic jam like no other. Wealth and want, style and survival, all jammed together in a chorus of honks, shouts, and laughter. A boy in a wool cap sets up a makeshift stall, a folding table propped on crates. Upon it lie jagged chunks of concrete, pieces of the wall itself, still streaked with spray paint. Ein Stück! Ein Stück! He cries, his voice breaking with youth and excitement. People crowd around, coins clinking into his hand. the fragments snatched up like holy relics. Some clutch them to their chest as if to prove to themselves it is real, that the wall is no longer whole. Behind him, a group of students swings hammers at the concrete barrier that still stands in jagged stretches. The metallic clangs echo like a heartbeat, steady, relentless. With each strike, more dust crumbles away, the graffiti-streaked surface surrendering inch by inch. Sparks leap where chisels meet rebar, and the crowd cheers every small collapse. The sound rolls through the night. Hammer, cheer, a rhythm of rebirth. Beyond the crossing, I walk into the East's cobbled streets, once dark and forbidding. The lamps here glow with a softer yellow hue. East Berlin's older bulbs casting a different light than the bright west just beyond. The air is damp, tinged with the scent of sausage sizzling on a vendor's grill. He ladles mustard onto rolls with mittened hands, shouting prices drowned by laughter. A young man in a frayed coat clutches 2 steaming bratwursts and presses one into the hand of a woman he has only just met. They laugh, and they eat as though the food itself tastes of freedom. I pass former border guards, their uniforms still pressed, but their posture utterly changed. They stand beside their booth, chatting with revelers, their rifles slung casually at their sides like forgotten props. One lights a cigarette for a woman, shielding the flame from the wind, and she smiles as if the gesture were unthinkable a month ago. Their faces are calm, even bemused, as though they themselves are only now learning how to stand without the weight of orders. At one corner, I see a group gathered around a street musician. His accordion wheezes out, "Ode to Joy," the notes cracked and imperfect, but no one cares. They sing along, east, west, young, old, their voices climbing above the damp, cold fog. Some weep as they sing, their tears carving shining paths down soot-smudged cheeks. The sound carries through the streets, swelling, breaking, then swelling again. I pause near a cluster of families locked in reunion. A woman presses her forehead against her brother's, both clutching each other, as if they could make up for 28 years in a single embrace. A child, perhaps 5 years old, clings to his grandfather's leg, too young to understand why everyone cries, but old enough to sense that the night is different from any other. A man in a long overcoat, clearly from the West, carries a bag of oranges and chocolate. He presses the fruit into the hands of children, one after the other, until the bag is empty. The children bite through the skin, juice running down their chins, laughing with mouths too full to speak. For decades, this taste had been rare, even forbidden. Tonight, it is a sacrament. I turn back toward the checkpoint itself. The small guard booth that once symbolized division is now covered in graffiti, scrawled hastily across its walls. "Wir sind ein Volk. We are one people." Candles flicker at its base, their flames wavering in the cold breeze. Someone has draped ivy and pine branches along its roof. Holiday greenery dressing the bones of an old cage. The sight is surreal. This was the very gate where men with guns once demanded papers, where silence reigned under the watchful eyes of towers. Tonight, it is a carnival. Children climb atop the sandbags, waving small West German flags, their mittens fluttering. A woman strums a guitar, singing old folk songs while strangers toss coins into her case. A man, clearly drunk, raises a bottle of sect and pours it into the street for everyone to taste. Checkpoint Charlie, the scar of the Cold War, has become a festival ground. The crowd thins slightly as I push further into the east's winding lanes. The cobblestones glisten with melted frost, every step crunching with grit. Around me, the conversations are alive with disbelief. I never thought I would see this night. My mother, she can come tomorrow. Look, look, pieces of the wall. The words tumble, overlap, collide. It feels less like a city and more like a single organism breathing together for the first time. At one corner, an elderly man raises a glass and says simply, Zum neuen Jahr, ohne Mauern, to the new year without walls. The crowd around him erupts in cheers, echoing his words until they become a chant. The sound carries through the narrow streets, spilling back toward the checkpoint. The night is cold, the air heavy with exhaust and smoke, but beneath it pulses something warmer than any fire. Relief. This is Berlin's first New Year's Eve without walls. The irony strikes me. What was once a gate to fear has become the stage for freedom's first act. The first step is literal. Through a crossing once locked, into streets once silenced. The wall still looms in fragments. The watchtowers still stand like teeth in the dark. But the people, laughing, crying, drinking, singing, are already tearing history apart, piece by piece. Tonight, Berliners are tasting freedom in real time, gulping it down like champagne poured too fast. And the night has only just begun. The farther I walk from the checkpoint, the louder the city breathes. It is not the sound of traffic or industry, but of people reclaiming air that once belonged to silence. Hammers ring, voices rise, laughter bursts like fireworks. I drift toward the shadow of a structure that, only weeks ago, cast fear deeper than night itself. The watchtower looms ahead, squat and square, its concrete walls washed in dull gray, its windows black holes staring out into the crowd. The spotlight mounted at its crown is dark now, its great beam extinguished forever. For decades it swept across these very cobblestones, pinning wanderers like prey. Tonight it sits mute, as though ashamed of its old duty. I pause beneath it. The cold seeps from its foundation into my bones. The silence here is different, not absence, but inversion. Where once boots marched, rifles clicked, and orders barked, now there are only murmurs of people gathering, punctuated by laughter that bounces off the bare walls like thrown stones. I can almost see the ghosts of guards who once peered from the windows above. Their faces were as blank as their orders, their silhouettes cutting against floodlight. Tonight, the only figures at the tower's base are children climbing its concrete legs, daring one another to touch the rusted iron door at the base. A boy slaps it and runs back, triumphant, as if conquering a fortress. The tower is powerless now. Its menace collapsed not by tanks or treaties, but by the simple fact that no one listens to it anymore. The street bends and I follow it, my breath a cloud in the air. To my left, the city stretches west, alive with neon and polished storefronts. To my right, the east rises in dark blocks of utilitarian housing, windows glowing with dim yellow bulbs. The light itself is different. Modern halogens bright and white on one side, old sodium lamps casting sepia gloom on the other. It is as though the wall still divides, even without its authority. The air smells of coal stoves from the east, mingling with diesel exhaust from the west. The scent of two worlds layered upon one street. A group of former guards walks past me, their uniforms half shed, caps tucked under arms. Their conversation is relaxed, punctuated by laughter. One gestures at the tower behind me, shaking his head in disbelief. They are men unburdened, as if someone has pried the iron bars from their lungs. The wall itself rises ahead, jagged and uneven, where sledgehammers have torn chunks away. On the western side, it is alive, every inch a canvas. Neon spray paint sprawls in thick strokes. Peace signs, cartoon faces. Words scrawled in English, French, Spanish, and German. Freedom, Liebe, liberty, Solidarność. Some pieces are polished art, full murals painted long before the fall. Others are raw, added only tonight, wet drips of paint running like tears. The concrete hums with color, the very opposite of the gray barrier it was meant to be. Families pose for photographs beside it, flashbulbs cutting through the mist. A young man chips at the surface with a hammer and chisel, each strike spraying dust that clings to his scarf. His girlfriend catches the fragments, placing them in her pocket as treasures. Nearby, a girl not older than 10 kneels with a butter knife, hacking at the cement while her parents cheer. Every fragment is a victory, every speck a wound healed. The sound is relentless. Hammer, chisel, cheer, metal on stone, a hymn in rhythm. I walk around the jagged edge to the east. The contrast is staggering. Here, the wall is bare and gray, scarred with cracks but blank, as though the very idea of color had been forbidden. No slogans, no paint, only the cold surface of oppression. Its height is more daunting here, unsoftened by art. A cliff of concrete rising out of the frozen soil. At its base, chunks lie scattered, some cleanly cut, others jagged, their steel rebar exposed like bones. Children clamber over them, balancing on the debris like a playground. Adults stop to touch the bare face of the wall, as if to assure themselves it cannot hurt them anymore. One man places both palms against the concrete and presses his forehead to it. He lingers there, murmuring words I cannot hear, before stepping back and raising a hammer high. The chisel screams, the wall shakes, and dust spills down his coat. The crowd cheers again. The rhythm of the hammers grows louder as I walk along the wall. It is not coordinated, not organized, but somehow it feels unified. The echo bounces through the streets like a drum line, calling people to join in. Some use tools, others their bare fists, pounding until their knuckles bleed. The air fills with dust, a fine white powder that coats hair and coats, glinting in the street lamps like snow. It mixes with the fog, softening the outlines of people who look like apparitions, figures half in the present, half fading into history. I realize This is the sound of a city rewriting itself, not in speeches or laws, but in hammer strikes. Each clang erases a boundary. Each fragment rewrites the skyline. Along the street, makeshift stalls appear, planks propped on crates, tables pulled from apartments. Upon them lie chips of concrete painted with peace signs or neon letters. Vendors call out, holding up fist-sized fragments. Ein Stück? Ein Stück. They are sold for coins, traded for cigarettes, swapped for hugs. Tourists from the West snap them up, tucking them into handbags. East Berliners slip small pieces into their pockets as if hiding them for later, proof that this night was real. Children hand fragments to one another like gifts, their faces smeared with chalk dust. I stop at one table. A man with a wool cap and weathered face grins at me, lifting a chunk flecked with bright red paint. He presses it into my hand, shaking his head when I reach for my wallet. "No," he says, his eyes shining. "Take it. It belongs to all of us." The concrete is cold and heavy, rough edges biting into my palm. I keep it, knowing I hold not rubble, but a relic. The wall, though crumbling, still casts its shadow. Between the hammers and cheers, there are quiet moments of unease. A woman in a long coat stares at the bare gray east side, her face lined with years of silence. She does not smile. She touches the wall once, gently, then turns away, disappearing into the crowd. Not everyone celebrates. For some, the scars are too fresh, the loss too heavy. The wall took decades of life, and not all wounds can be erased in a night of champagne. But the children, they only know tonight. They scramble over the fragments, laugh through dust-choked air, and swing their hammers without fear. They are already living in the world their parents only dreamed of. The Watchtower stands empty behind me, its spotlight forever dark. The wall crumbles beside me, each hammer strike peeling away a layer of fear. What were once instruments of oppression are now playgrounds, canvases, marketplaces. Berlin breathes differently here, half euphoria, half disbelief. The skyline is haunted by scars, but the streets sing with renewal. The symbols of division are crumbling, brick by brick. Yet they haunt the night like specters, and maybe they always will. But tonight, those echoes are drowned by the clang of hammers, the laughter of children, and the sound of a city reclaiming its voice. The city pulls me westward, away from the hollow watchtowers and scarred concrete of the wall, into a space that once embodied emptiness itself. Potsdamer Platz. For decades, a wasteland, cut through by the wall's dead zone, a stretch of no man's land where weeds grew higher than children and guards stood ready with rifles. Tonight, it is alive. The square spreads before me like a scar, suddenly blooming with light. Potsdamer Platz had been erased, a place that existed only on old postcards and whispered nostalgia, its crossroads bulldozed into nothing when the wall cleaved Berlin in two. For years, it was a map's blank spot, a dead center of division. Now, on New Year's Eve, 1989, it feels like the earth itself has exhaled. The ground is uneven, rubble and mud churned by the stamp of hundreds of boots. Piles of broken concrete still rise in heaps, iron rods protruding like twisted ribs. But where silence once reigned, now firecrackers explode overhead, sparks arcing through the cold night. Their smoke hangs in the damp air, mixing with the heavier fog of coal stoves and gasoline. Each burst of light casts the ruin into strange shapes, shadows of a city half demolished, half reborn. People swarm the square. They climb onto rubble piles and abandoned slabs, waving flags, bottles, and each other's hands. Some dance on the jagged concrete as though daring the ghosts of the wall to stop them. Others gather in tight circles singing, their voices colliding in a jumble of dialects. A woman in a wool hat begins a verse of Alla Yara Wieder, and strangers join, hesitant at first, then swelling into harmony that carries across the void like a cathedral choir. Everywhere I turn, there are faces streaked with tears, some from smoke, some from joy. I see an older man clasping the shoulders of a younger woman, his daughter perhaps, his eyes fixed on the ground, as if trying to reconcile what once was with what is happening now. The contrast is staggering. This was once a frontier of fear, patrolled and barren. Now, it is a festival, raw and unpolished, but pulsing with the kind of energy only possible when something broken is suddenly made whole. The air itself feels different here. Cold, yes, biting at ears and fingertips, but layered with scents that tell the story of the night. Coal smoke drifts from chimneys still clinging to the east, acrid and heavy. The sharp tang of cheap champagne cuts through, corks popping every few minutes as though marking time toward midnight. The greasy warmth of sausages sizzles from makeshift grills dragged into the square, their smoke curling above heads and snagging in scarves. And underneath it all, the faint, oily note of two-stroke Trabant engines, sputtering and coughing as they idle beside gleaming Mercedes sedans from the west. It is a smell no perfume could bottle. Hardship, revelry, and transition mingling into something unmistakably alive. As I press deeper into the square, the party transforms into a marketplace of memory. Long planks rest across stacks of bricks, forming tables piled high with chipped concrete, each fragment painted in neon colors from the wall's west side. Vendors cry out, holding fist-sized pieces aloft. Ein Stück der Freiheit, take a piece, the prices vary. Some sell for coins, others are pressed into hands for free, like communion bread passed among believers. A man in a thick coat has laid out a sheet on the ground, covered with flags, pins, and badges, symbols that only days ago could have brought suspicion. Small East German flags, with their hammer and compass insignia, are sold beside West German black-red golds. Some buyers collect both, pinning them side by side to jackets, as if to say, "We are whole now." The vendors are not only professionals, but ordinary people, families, teenagers, pensioners, all grasping the opportunity to turn history into sustenance. One boy, no older than 12, sells tiny chunks of wall in matchboxes, each labeled in careful handwriting, Mauer, December 1989. His fingers are smudged with chalk, his grin wide as he presses the boxes into eager hands. Near the heart of the square, the smell of grilled sausage pulls me toward a line of carts. the sizzle of fat, the clink of glass bottles, the sound of coins clattering onto metal counters, all form a rhythm of commerce as ancient as the market itself. At one stall, a man from the east clutches a green bottle of beer. The label gleams foreign to him, printed in crisp lettering that once belonged only to the other side. He stares at it, turning it over, as though unsure whether to drink or simply marvel. A West Berliner, standing beside him, raises his own bottle. For a moment, the two men simply look at each other. One face lined with years of scarcity, the other softened by years of relative ease. Then, slowly, the East Berliner lifts his bottle. The West Berliner grins. Their glass necks clink together, sharp and bright, and both laugh. The sound carries, unself-conscious, and in it is every reconciliation the city has been waiting for. Tears streak down the East Berliner's face as he finally takes his first sip. Around him, cheers rise, as if the simple act of swallowing beer has become a political act, a sacrament of reunion. At the edges of the marketplace, music drifts on the air. Not organized, not orchestrated, but spontaneous. Someone beats a rhythm on an empty oil drum. A woman strums a battered guitar, her fingers stiff in the cold. A group of teenagers from the east stomp their feet in time, singing folk songs loud enough to rattle in their chests. Others dance on the rubble itself, boots crunching broken concrete, skirts swirling in the cold air. They leap and spin as though mocking the wall, daring it to rise again. Firecrackers pop above their heads, sparks raining down, illuminating their faces in bursts of red and green. This, I think, is what joy looks like when it has no rehearsal. It is messy, chaotic, beautiful. Yet beneath the laughter and music, I can feel the hum of commerce blooming instantly. History is being sold in real time, its value measured in marks and coins. What was once a tool of oppression has become merchandise, traded for sausages, beer, and trinkets. But no one here seems cynical. They are not profiteers. They are participants. Selling a chunk of wall is less about profit than sharing proof that the wall has fallen, that freedom can be held in your hand, that tonight is not a dream. I see one woman wrap a fragment in cloth and tuck it into her basket alongside bread and apples. Another man presses a piece into his child's mittened hand, whispering something in his ear. The boy nods solemnly, as though entrusted with treasure. By the time I drift to the far edge of the square, my boots are dusted white with concrete powder, my coat scented with sausage smoke and champagne. Behind me, Potsdamer Platz roars with firecrackers, laughter, and song. Before me, the streets ripple with new stalls, new voices, new memories already taking shape. Berlin has transformed a wasteland into a festival ground. Where once there was only emptiness, now there is excess. Not polished, not ordered, but raw and immediate. Commerce feeds bodies with beer and sausage, hearts with souvenirs and laughter, and memories with fragments of stone that were once a prison. The wall is being consumed, not only by hammers, but by markets, songs, and shared toasts. Freedom has a taste, a smell, a sound. And tonight, at Potsdamer Platz, it is everywhere. The city's pulse changes as I leave the rubble and makeshift markets of Potsdamer Platz behind. There the joy was raw, almost chaotic, dancing on broken stone, firecrackers hissing above rubble piles, sausages sizzling beside fragments of the wall. Here, as I move eastward, the celebration carries a different timbre. It is not quieter, but more layered, as though Berlin itself is testing how freedom should sound. The square opens before me like a stage long abandoned and suddenly reclaimed. Alexanderplatz had been a showpiece of East German planning, a place meant to display order, grandeur, and the reach of Soviet design. Its vast, open space was intended to dwarf the individual, to remind citizens of the state's weight pressing down upon them. Tonight, on New Year's Eve, 1989, it is reclaimed by the people themselves. The architecture still looms, cold and severe. The Fernsehturm, the TV tower, pierces the sky, its concrete needle half lost in mist. The red aviation light blinks steadily, indifferent to the transformation below. Around the square, the facades of block-like buildings wear their Soviet heritage openly, simple, rigid, their signage in faded reds and yellows. Neon signs flicker, once proclamations of socialist achievement, now glowing faintly as if ashamed. But what had been a place of parades and official speeches has become a carnival. Crowds gather in knots, voices clashing and blending, laughter bouncing from the bare stone walls. The air is thick with accents. Berlin dialects rough and earthy, Bavarian lilts, Saxon drawls, the softer tones of Westphalia. Even English rises above the hum. Foreign students and tourists mixing with locals, drawn by the magnet of history. For decades, such mingling was impossible. Tonight, it is the background music of freedom. Children chase one another across the square, their boots slipping on icy patches. A boy from the east, his jacket too thin for the cold, holds hands with a girl in a thick West German coat. They giggle, their scarves tangling in the wind. Beside them, a group of young men hammer at a remnant slab of the wall still standing near the edge of the square. Each metallic clang echoes across the vast plaza, mingling with shouts and bursts of song. Fireworks crack overhead, crude but effective. Each detonation blooms against the concrete walls, washing them briefly in color. Where once slogans extolling socialism filled the space, now graffiti sprawls, peace signs, slogans, even cartoon caricatures of officials long feared. The gray canvas has been stolen by spray paint, its permanence mocked by color. What strikes me most is the sound. It is not the roar of a single voice, not the choreographed chants of a rally. It is layered, contradictory, alive. The sharp clink of bottles as champagne corks pop and glasses clink. The rhythmic hammering at concrete, steady as drums. The roar of Trabant engines, two-stroke motors coughing blue smoke into the cold night, sputtering beside the low purr of BMWs and Mercedes now parked in the square. The laughter and cries of families embracing after years apart, joy breaking into sobs, then back into song. And above it all, the steady toll of church bells, distant but insistent, reminding the city that even as regimes rise and fall, the year will always turn. The sound defines freedom here. Where once silence was enforced, now every noise is permitted. The air itself vibrates with liberation. At the square's edge, Tables have been hastily set up. Vendors sell sausages browned over coal fires, the smell thick and comforting. Others hawk paper hats with Freiheit painted across the brim. A woman in her 50s stands behind a makeshift stall lined with Soviet-era medals, their ribbons frayed but still bright. She sells them for coins, her face unreadable. Are they relics of pride or simply tokens shed from a fallen order? Perhaps both. Nearby, a man sells postcards printed just days ago, photographs of people chipping at the wall, of crowds streaming through Brandenburg Gate, of guards watching passively as history marched past them. The ink is barely dry, yet already they are souvenirs, proof of freedom mailed to relatives abroad. From Alexanderplatz, I follow the throng westward, down the grand boulevard of Unter den Linden. Once the ceremonial heart of Prussian kings and Nazi parades, later the showcase of East German authority. Tonight, it is a river of celebration. The broad boulevard stretches out beneath rows of bare trees, their branches clawing at the fog. Gas lamps flicker along the way, their yellow glow mixing with the harsh white beams of car headlights. And what a strange traffic jam it is. Trabant cars sputtering beside gleaming BMWs and Mercedes, their exhaust clouds weaving together. The sputter and cough of two-stroke engines clash with the low, polished hum of Western machines, a mechanical duet of two worlds colliding. People walk arm in arm between the cars, scarves trailing in the icy air. Couples kiss in the middle of intersections, laughter ringing louder than honking horns. Others stop at the wall's remnants lining the avenue. Here, too, chisels chip, sparks fly. Fragments of concrete fall into waiting hands. Each blow is cheered as if each shard carried away were another mile of history erased. As I move down Unter den Linden, the buildings rise like silent witnesses. Their architecture speaks of Soviet authority, stern facades, blocky designs, practical to the point of cruelty. Faded banners still hang, their slogans meaningless in the new air. Yet tonight, those same facades are draped with improvised banners, white sheets painted with words of unity, calls for democracy, cries of joy. Windows glow warmly, ivy and candles faintly visible through the glass, reminders that families within are celebrating as privately as the crowds outside are publicly. The air is alive with voices, a choir of freedom, disorganized, imperfect, but unstoppable. The sound is not uniform. It is chaotic, full of arguments and embraces, shouts and laughter, but it is human, unregulated, unafraid. Near the boulevard's midpoint, I stop to watch a boy hammer at the wall's edge. His blows are clumsy, each strike too light to do real damage. But his father stands beside him, steadying the chisel with gloved hands. The boy grunts with effort, his breath visible in the cold. Finally, a small piece breaks free, a chunk of gray concrete streaked with pink paint from graffiti. The boy lifts it high, grinning, and the crowd nearby cheers as if he has toppled the entire structure. His father ruffles his hair, eyes wet. It is a tiny moment, but it speaks louder than speeches. Here, in the middle of Berlin, a child chips away at the past. his laughter carrying forward where silence once stood. By the time I near the end of Unter den Linden, the sounds have fused into something overwhelming. Car horns, hammers, laughter, firecrackers, and bells blend together until it feels less like noise and more like a single living organism. The sound of a city exhaling after holding its breath for nearly 30 years. This boulevard once belonged to rulers, to tanks, to parades of power. Tonight, it belongs to the people. The Soviet shadows still linger in the architecture, in the faded signs, in the watchful faces of older men who remember too much. But they are drowned beneath the tide of sound, a hymn of freedom, improvised in real time. As I pause at the boulevard's end, the Brandenburg Gate faint in the distance, I realize that freedom here is not silent. It is not the hushed reverence of a church or the careful words of diplomacy. It is noisy, messy, layered with contradictions. It smells of coal smoke and champagne, of sausages and gasoline. It rattles with Trabant engines and sparkles with firecrackers. It is imperfect, but it is alive. Alexanderplatz had been a showcase of the state. Unter den Linden had been a corridor of power. Tonight, both are reclaimed by the people, their voices reshaping the city's soundscape. The sound of freedom is not uniform. It is a chorus. And in Berlin, on this night, it cannot be silenced. The noise grows as I push westward, carried along by currents of people flowing toward the city's most enduring symbol. The Brandenburg Gate has stood through kings, emperors, Nazis, Soviets. It has been a backdrop to triumph and tyranny alike. Tonight, on the edge of a new decade, it is reclaimed once again. Its columns no longer a wall, but a bridge. The wide, open square of Pariser Platz spreads before me, its cobblestones slick with frost and champagne spills. Here the crowd is denser, pressed shoulder to shoulder, but the air is different, charged with reverence. At the base of the wall, just before the gate, candles flicker in small clusters. Wax drips onto the concrete, pooling against graffiti-streaked stone. Families kneel to arrange flowers, roses, carnations, winter sprigs, into fragile shrines for those who never lived to see this night. Their faces glow with both joy and grief, the tears on their cheeks shining as brightly as the flames. A woman in her 60s, wrapped in a thick wool coat, presses a black and white photograph against the wall before setting it among the candles. The face in the picture is of a young man, his eyes bright, his smile careless. She strokes the paper once, then steps back, folding her hands in prayer. Around her, strangers place their arms gently on her shoulders. No words are exchanged, but the silence speaks volumes. Tonight's freedom is haunted by absence. The air carries the sharp scent of paraffin and pine branches, layered over the constant tang of coal smoke. Somewhere nearby, sausages sizzle on a vendor's cart, the fat spitting against the iron plate. Hunger and memory mingle, the stomach's needs and the soul's mourning sharing the same square. For all the jubilation, there is gravity here. The Brandenburg Gate looms just beyond, floodlit from below, its columns painted in gold light that pierces the night fog. The quadriga atop, the goddess of victory steering her chariot, gazes out over the masses. For decades, she looked down on division. Tonight, she oversees reunion. The sound shifts too. Amid the laughter and chatter, I catch snatches of hymns, old Lutheran carols rising from small clusters. A family begins softly singing Stille Nacht, and others join, the melody fragile against the winter air. Candles sway, hands clasp, and for a moment, the square feels like a cathedral without walls. I move slowly, careful not to disturb the shrines weaving through the crowd. On one side of the square, vendors shout above the din, hawking champagne bottles and fragments of the wall chipped into keychains. On the other, a boy, about 12 chips, steadily at the concrete with a hammer. Each strike echoes with defiance, the sound swallowed by cheers from those around him. The contrast defines the place. Joy and grief. Sausages and candles. Families laughing, families mourning. Berlin in miniature, scarred, divided, jubilant, unashamed of the contradiction. Overhead, fireworks burst in sporadic volleys, showering sparks against the fog. The smoke mixes with exhaust from Trabants and BMWs, locked together in the great traffic jam stretching up Unter den Linden. Horns honk, people cheer, and suddenly a cheer swells louder than the rest. Heads tilt upward, to the west of the gate. Near the gathering epicenter, floodlights snap on, blinding in their sudden brilliance. Their beams slice through the mist, scattering into pale halos. The crowd's attention pivots. Atop a massive crane, suspended over the Potsdamer Platz, a figure in a black leather jacket studded with lights rises into view. From a distance, it looks almost surreal, like something from a stage show dropped into a street revolution. The voice that follows confirms it. The surreal icon of late 80s television and music grips the microphone, his voice cutting over the throng with the opening lines of Looking for Freedom. At first, there's hesitation. The song, a glossy pop anthem, feels absurd against the shrines and candles, against the history still trembling in the cobblestones. But then, like a wave, the crowd leans into it. Voices rise, lighters spark, sparklers catch flame. Tens of thousands sing along, not because of the song's fame, but because of what it represents. The absurd, improbable, unstoppable tide of freedom itself. I glance at the shrines along the wall and see something remarkable. The woman who laid her photograph earlier now lifts her candle, swaying it in rhythm. Tears still streak her face, but she sings, her voice cracking, carrying upward into the floodlit night. Potsdamer Platz becomes an ocean. The wave of sound rolls forward and back, cheering, singing, chanting. From my vantage, I see East German border guards leaning from their watch posts, their uniforms stark against the floodlit stone. But their faces are different now. Not rigid, not grim. They watch the spectacle like anyone else, smiling faintly, their hands relaxed on railings once meant to contain. A young guard, barely more than a boy, raises a bottle of beer given to him by someone in the crowd. He tips it back, drinks, then grins broadly, his cap sliding crooked on his head. Around him, his colleagues laugh. The once feared enforcers are just men in the cold, watching a city claim its night. Everywhere, sparklers flicker. thousands of tiny stars rising above heads, lighting faces with firefly glow. The light reflects in eyes, in champagne bottles, in the brass buttons of coats. It feels less like a concert and more like a communal ritual, improvised but deeply human. Yet even as Hasselhoff belts the chorus, his voice amplified into anthem, the memory of the wall remains heavy. The shrines at its base burn steadily, candles fluttering against graffiti. For every cheer, there is a pause when someone bends to touch the stone, to whisper the name of someone lost. I stand between these two forces, the solemn gravity of remembrance and the neon absurdity of spectacle. Together, they define this moment. Without grief, joy would feel shallow. Without joy, grief would overwhelm. Tonight, Berlin refuses to choose. It holds both, side by side. The song swells, voices uniting. Around me, couples kiss, friends embrace, strangers clasp hands. A man in a fur hat raises his lighter, high, his arm trembling. A woman beside him, her accent Saxon, her hair tied back with a simple ribbon, rests her head on his shoulder. For them, the music is not about David Hasselhoff or pop charts. It is about the simple, undeniable fact of freedom sung aloud. And the sounds, the chorus of freedom, are everywhere. The hammers still striking concrete, echoing like percussion. The cheers rising and falling, carried across the square like waves. The two-stroke sputter of Trabants forced into idle beside sleek Mercedes. The crackle of fireworks blending with the laughter of children perched on their father's shoulders. And above it all, the improbable voice of an American entertainer turned folk hero, amplified into anthem. As the final chorus fades and the floodlights dim, the square exhales. The gate still looms, solemn and eternal, but it has been transformed. Where once it marked division, tonight it witnesses communion. Candles still burn, steady and small, at the wall's base. The shrines do not diminish the joy. They ground it, reminding every voice raised that freedom is not free, that it came at the cost of lives lost in shadows. But above those candles, sparklers still glow, and the gate itself is drenched in color. Memory and spectacle collide here. Grief for the dead, joy for the living, woven together in the sound of freedom. I linger in the square, the song still vibrating in the cold night air. The quadriga above, goddess of victory, gazes down not on parades of power, but on a people singing themselves into a new future. The night has been building toward this. Every step from Checkpoint Charlie to Pariser Platz gathering momentum like a great drumbeat rolling through the city. And now, standing in the crush of bodies at the Brandenburg Gate, I feel the rhythm crest. The square, the gate, the wall itself, all of it is alive, a single organism pulsing with noise, fire, and impossible joy. The Brandenburg Gate towers above, floodlit so bright its columns gleam like marble despite the soot and scars of history. For decades, it was the backdrop of division, a silent witness to tanks and soldiers, a prop in the theater of Cold War defiance. Tonight, it is something else entirely. Hundreds of thousands press into the square, a mass of faces lit alternately by torchlight, fireworks, and sparklers. The air is thick with champagne mist, coal smoke, and the acrid tang of gunpowder. The crowd is not orderly. It surges, sways, collapses into laughter, then rises again in song. Above it all, the quadriga, the goddess of victory driving her chariot, casts her bronze gaze across the chaos. For once, she seems not aloof, but a part of it, as though her horses are straining forward into freedom itself. At 10 minutes to midnight, the city erupts in whistles. Boilers scream from rooftops, factory horns blare, ships on the Spree and Havel release long, mournful blasts. The city itself is announcing the countdown. Then the sky cracks. Fireworks streak upward, launched from rooftops, balconies, even from within the packed crowd itself. There is no central display, no choreography, just chaos. Rockets whistle past with terrifying nearness, then burst into brilliant fountains of red, green, and gold. Sparks rain down into the crowd, and nobody flinches. People laugh, cover their heads, drink from bottles, and cheer louder. The fog thickens with smoke, every burst of light diffusing into glowing halos. For moments at a time, it feels as though the gate itself is aflame, glowing orange and red beneath the bombardment. The noise is constant: detonations, cheers, horns, songs, all blending into a storm of sound. My chest vibrates with it. At the gate's base, the wall remains, a jagged, graffiti-splattered scar. But tonight, it is no barrier. Tonight, it is a stage. People climb onto its crest, waving flags, German tricolors, European banners, even American and Soviet standards repurposed into symbols of unity. Young men help older relatives up the concrete. Girls in fur-lined coats balance precariously, arms spread wide, hair flying in the wind as they shout freedom into the night sky. Hammers ring against stone, the rhythm echoing like percussion in a great orchestra. Every strike chips away more of the old world. Some swing with fury, others with joy, all with purpose. Chunks fall into waiting hands below, pass like relics through the crowd. On the western side, the wall is still drenched in graffiti, slogans glowing in the light of sparklers. Freiheit, Wir sind das Volk, Nie wieder Mauer. On the eastern side, gray and bare, spray paint cans hiss as artists reclaim blank stone. Each stroke is a declaration. This will never stand silent again. I am caught in the mass, pressed shoulder to shoulder. On one side, a man in a worn East German uniform has unbuttoned his jacket, tossing his cap to a laughing boy. On the other, a woman from the West holds her newborn high above the crowd, as though baptizing the child in freedom's light. Strangers embrace strangers. A young Berliner, his accent pure East, wraps me in a sudden hug, shoving a bottle of Sekt into my hand. His eyes are wet, his smile irrepressible. Zum neuen Jahr, he shouts, voice breaking, and I echo it back, though he has gone again into the tide before the words leave my lips. Nearby, a pair of sisters weep into each other's shoulders, their faces pressed together as though afraid to let go again. Around them, groups dance in wild, uneven circles, scarves trailing, boots slipping on icy cobblestones. The mixture of languages is astonishing. German in every dialect, Russian curses repurposed into cheers, French and English tourists marveling aloud, Italian voices singing scraps of opera into the roar. For decades, this place was silence and fear. Now it is a chorus. The crowd begins to chant. Zehn, neun, acht. A rolling countdown, voices surging louder with each number. The fireworks crescendo, more frantic, more reckless. A final whistle echoes across the square as the last seconds collapse. Then, midnight. The square detonates in sound and light. Champagne corks explode in every direction, their spray catching torchlight. Fireworks launch upward, all at once, as though the entire city has held its breath for 30 years and exhaled together. The Brandenburg Gate disappears into a white blaze of smoke and sparks. When it clears, the goddess above still rides her chariot, illuminated in golden floodlight, her bronze features fierce and triumphant. Beneath, the wall shakes with the weight of bodies stomping, dancing, shouting. Flags whip in the wind. The hammers never stop, even as embraces multiply. Division itself is turning to dust before my eyes. Church bells peal across the city, their deep tones rolling like waves over the chaos. The bells of freedom, of memory, of a new year. They blend with the laughter, the fireworks, the kisses of strangers who will never meet again, but tonight share eternity. I stand there, head tilted back, the champagne mist freezing on my face. The world is louder than I have ever heard it, yet inside me there is a profound silence, an awe that humbles. The wall, the gate, the shrines at Platz, all fuse into one image, a people reclaiming their breath after decades underwater. What was once a scar is now a stage. What was once a wound is now a memory, healed not with forgetting, but with fire and song. In the chaos, I feel a collective sigh of relief ripple outward, as if the city itself has shed its skin. Not all divisions will vanish overnight. The scars will remain. But tonight, for these hours, unity is not a dream, but a reality made flesh in fireworks and embraces. Slowly, as the first minutes of 1990 tick forward, I drift away from the gate. The crush is too dense, the heat of bodies too fierce. I step back, weaving toward the edge of the square. Turning, I look one last time. The Brandenburg Gate looms through the haze, its columns painted red by fireworks, its goddess shining against the fog. On the wall, silhouettes still dance, their shadows stretching long across the square. I linger, unwilling to leave, but finally I step into the quieter streets beyond. The sound follows, muted now, but still insistent, like a heartbeat echoing through stone. The wall is falling still, but more than concrete is crumbling. A way of life, a weight, an era. Tonight, I walked through its dust and stood beneath its ruins as freedom was born anew. The Brandenburg Gate has witnessed kings, emperors, tyrants, and wars. Tonight, it bore witness to candles, kisses, and fire in the sky. For the first time in decades, it stood not as a barrier, but as a beacon. Rest easy, friends. The rabbit hole of time holds many more slow steps. Until we meet again, this is Silas, signing off.